The Rights To Ricky Sanchez podcast is presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook by using promo code RTRS and brought to you by LL Pavorsky Jewelers, where Rights To Ricky Sanchez listeners go and get engaged. Adam Kasabi, the official realtor of The Process at processrealtor.com, and Kinetic Skateboarding. Get 9.1% off your first order with promo code Dave Silver. On the show today, we're back. Well, I'm back. Mike is moving, so no Mike today. Mike will be back for our next pod, but we had so many important things to talk about. We got a couple of special guests, one to talk about a guy who is gone and one to talk about a guy who might be gone. So Yaron Weitzman, NBA writer for Fox Sports and author of Tanking to the Top, joins me to talk about the CEO of the Sixers getting pushed out. That is no longer CEO of the Sixers or Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment. So Yaron will join me about that. And then our very own Michael Connor will join me to talk about his 10 different Ben Simmons trades he put up on the website and then got yelled at by Twitter about because none of them are good enough. So we'll talk to Mike about Ben's trade value, so on and so forth. Before we get going, two important things. First of all, happy birthday, Gabe. Happy birthday, Gabe. I don't think I know Gabe. Gabe, your fiance Lauren wanted to express her birthday wishes to you, asked if we could do it on the podcast, so here I am. So Lauren is not a Sixers fan. She is just a kid from Akron, literally, so she's a Cavs fan. I wonder if she's a Lakers fan now, too, because LeBron people are like that, because Akron's not really Cleveland. In any case, since the beginning, Gabe has been a dedicated Ricky guy, forcing Lauren and their dog Jackie to listen to the Ricky on long road trips, even though she's not a Sixers fan. I don't know if the dog's a Sixers fan. From everything that Lauren says, Gabe sounds like a wonderful guy. Lauren, obviously, a very good person to email a stranger to see if she will wish her fiance a happy birthday on a podcast. So happy birthday, Gabe. Sorry for the way he is, Lauren. I wish I could pet your dog, Jackie. And congratulations, Gabe, on the marrying somebody you work with thing happening. I did that as well. Hopefully it works out for you. So, happy birthday, Gabe. And then the second thing is Kinetic Skateboarding. I mentioned them at the top. I'm actually going to stop by there today to pick up my Ricky/Kinetic shorts that we did to benefit Providence Animal Center. I'm currently wearing the you can see on YouTube, the camouflage Kinetic sweatpants. Every time I go into Kinetic, I buy something extra than what I was going to buy. Buy a hoodie, buy a t-shirt, buy some sneakers. That's where you go. And with it being summer, it's perfect skateboard weather if you're a skateboard type person, but that's where you want to go. Go to kineticskateboarding.com and use promo code DaveSilver for 9.1% off your first order. Without any further ado, Amos and the chef.
We were right, y'all. We were right. Even when it went wrong, we were right. We was right, y'all. We were right. So say the name. Say the name. We were right, y'all. We were right. Even when it went wrong, we were right. We were right, y'all. We were right. So say the name. Say the name. Say the name.
Welcome to the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast. I'm Spike Eskin, along with a guy who is not my co-host. It is not Mike Levine. It seems so fitting that after years of us trying to chase the CEO away from the Sixers, we didn't chase him away, but he finally gets chased away, and Mike is moving and unable to do the podcast this weekend. But I thought the next best scenario would be Yaron Weitzman. So Yaron currently is an NBA writer for Fox, but he wrote Tanking to the Top. We had him on when that book came out, and Yaron has a lot of institutional knowledge, I would say, covered the team for a long time to write the book, and I thought would be a great person to talk about the farewell to Scott O'Neil. So thank you for joining us, Yaron.
I forgot I should have prepared like my spiffy one-liner, right? I forgot to do that.
Nah, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be spiffy or no one-liners. So let me... First of all, I think like the last time we talked to you when the book came out, I don't even know if you're still with Bleacher Report or you weren't anymore, but congrats on the Fox job.
Thank you. I was still with Bleacher Report. They let us go in the middle of the pandemic, so that's good.
Oh, it was good. Yeah, it was great stuff. Great stuff. Well, congratulations on landing on your feet. And you are where your feet are now, apparently.
I like it.
So and I want to, at the end of this, we'll talk about Scott O'Neil for a bit. And then you wrote a big feature on Ben Simmons after the playoffs, which I thought will lead nicely into the second half of this pod when we have Mike O'Connor on and we talk about some Ben Simmons trades. So I want to talk about that at the end. But the Scott O'Neil thing, so there are some things in Tanking to the Top that do provide a window into what Scott was like as a CEO for, officially his title for HBSE for Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment. So overseeing the Devils, the Prudential Center, and the Sixers as well. I wanted to offer you my tea leaves reading from afar and see if it resonates with you as to how this walkaway happened. Because my perception is that when the Colangelo thing happened, when Burnergate happened, that it was seen to be under his watch. He was close with Brian, and he was sort of like feet on the ground with the Sixers, so Harris and Blitz could do whatever they were doing. And it seemed as though his visibility as CEO and his stock at some point, right around then, seemed to take a hit. And the last few years have almost been a different version of him, at least publicly, and have all led into this soft landing exit that is happening now. Is my perception correct in that? Do you think?
It's interesting. I'm thinking. So I've never made the Colangelo connection before on that one. But what I can tell you, I'm trying to think of. I can tell you this. Like I remember, to me, one of the first times I heard about like him, maybe Scott could be in trouble from people around there was the mentioning the pandemic and losing jobs, the slashing of salaries. I forget, you remember the details better than I did, but like that whole thing got bungled. What was it? They mid-level sales guy, like basically mid-level employees on the business side, they wanted to cut their salaries, and these were people who were probably making like 60 grand, and you wanted to cut that to like 45, which that's a huge difference, right? And people were pretty furious. And when Embiid basically said, I'll cover their salaries, maybe I'm butchering that a little bit, right? But wasn't that basically what happened?
So they wanted to cut salaries, at least for the quarter, of everyone making 50 grand or more. Right. And then Embiid, and this came out as Embiid, but my sense is that I don't believe that Michael Rubin was uninvolved in that on some level. Embiid came out and committed money to make up for that, and then basically shamed the Sixers into taking it back, and saying, okay, we're not going to do it. So you think that was an important moment?
I think that was around the same time. Again, you'll remember the details better than I will exactly, but the leaked failed bid by the Navy Yard for the new arena. Like there were a couple PR things that, if Scott O'Neil's job is to keep the sheen on the Sixers looking good, that was not good. So, and again, you mix that, I find the Michael Rubin part, this is me purely inferring, but I have also always had my antenna up about that, especially as he upped his ownership in Harris Blitzer. It was like 10% or something, where he bought in more last year. It used to be 1-2%. So you add him, and then that's adding more egos, right? There's a lot of big egos in that room. And I think, and I have a feeling what kind of happened is that it was just too many chefs, too many egos. And maybe Scott had worn out his welcome a little bit. We should say, Scott has very much pushed that it was him. He's leaving on his own accord to go save the world or something like that, right?
Right.
So, I don't know. I guess, if you believe that, God bless. Yeah, so to go back to your original question, I never made the Colangelo connection, but I do think you're right, and this is me, inferring while talking to some people who are all maybe guessing-ish, but have more knowledge, right? Former employees or whatever. I do think there's something about like things were just not going the way they were supposed to. If you're Scott O'Neill and you're the super smart, awesome sports business journal, and like the media part, I think is a big part of this, right? But the sports business journal, top executive of all time, making up all these titles, and Forbes writes about you every 2 weeks. And you have all that stuff, and things aren't being, a lot of negative stuff, to use a fancy word, right, is popping up. I just think it's not a good look.
Yeah, the failed bid for the arena, I actually am proud how vocal we were against that. Not that they wanted an arena, but that they wanted to use public money for the arena. Yes. Like this, three of the richest guys you could ever dream in Blitz, Harris and Michael Rubin, that they wanted to use, and honestly, where they wanted to put it would have been a nightmare. And we had a city council member on just to make
great.
fun of them for it. Yeah,
but didn't the story, like, it got leaked that they failed, right? That was the weird part. And that, again, not looking for Scott, if I remember correctly, right? We first heard about it after it was shut down. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, we first heard about it when it was one of the bids that came in for that land. Because that's a part of Philadelphia, the riverfront, that's been a nothing forever, and it should be something. And what better way to take advantage of this beautiful riverfront than to put an indoor basketball arena right on it? So anyway, most fans, I would say, have very little idea who the CEO of their favorite sports team is. Why do you think that Scott O'Neill was a different story here than for most sports teams?
I was just I was talking to Steph Bondy from Daily News about this, because I was like saying it feels like there's a small group. I don't even know if it's a group. Is it Scott O'Neill and then maybe Rick Welts is the only other guy who is in this? And you're saying even, this is the guy, the former president of the Suns and Warriors, but it kind of proving my point, right? There's the idea that these business executives become forward-facing people is just unprecedented. So the Scott O'Neill thing, I think there's a mix, right? One, and I don't think this is just because you and I have our brains rewired in certain ways, but he was involved in the process, right? And that part, that whole story, as you and I both know, just drove everyone nuts and just created all these reactions and made people and things famous for ways that are, hard to exactly put your finger on, or maybe you can, or basically you've been doing a podcast for 10 years explaining that, right? So there's that. Definitely coming from New York, and I think this is also, I always go back to this, right? So he lost in the Knicks, he was forced out, and I think, I don't know, in terms of reputation, I feel like losing out or being pushed out by James Dolan, could be one of the best things that can happen to you, because it's like an enemy of my enemy is my friend thing. So if you get, if James Dolan says you're bad and get out of here, that all of a sudden makes you like beloved in New York, right? And like this cult-like figure. And then obviously there's the part where, the whole relationship with Sam Hinkie, and Scott was very forward-facing. And you asked also why people know him. Scott wants people to know who he is, and that's a key part of it as well. Whether it's being involved in basketball decisions, and I think more so just being on CNBC. I said Sports Business Journal and Forbes, and he goes on all the Sloan panels, and they PR. He is so. We just saw it with the book, right? And he's going on how many NBA podcasts even, right, are having him on to talk about be where your feet are, or whatever the phrase was. So he's really good at the PR thing, and I think that's an interesting story, which we can talk about in a little bit. But like, he's really good at the PR thing, and I'm guilty of this in a way, right? In my book and in the process, like there are stories written about somehow in the middle of the process, you have stories coming out about how awesome the Sixers sales team is, right? And how much fun they're having, and how great they are at selling tickets. So all that stuff, and then you add the part where he played a major role in Sam Hinkie being ousted, and I think that's kind of your answer.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of parts to why Sam lost his job, and Sam may have lost his job without Scott O'Neill, but Scott O'Neill certainly. It just goes back to the MCW trade, and we've told the story on the podcast a lot of times, but there was an ownership call with Sam, with owners, with Scott about the MCW trade, and Scott had already, they had already produced their season ticket packages for the year, and they were sent out, and Scott basically indicated to owners that if they made the trade, that there would be Armageddon in the city, that people would turn against the team, and it was that moment where I think that was the split. I'm sure there was friction before that, but to my recollection, that was the moment that the writing was going to be on the wall for Sam. And of course, there were a lot of other things. There was Okafor getting in the fight, Okafor speeding, them not wanting to put out a press release. Yeah. There's all this, the league. But I think Scott was the central piece of all of that, given his league connections and giving his connections to ownership, right?
I was going to say those. I think that what you just said, the last two parts, right? Because that's the thing to remember. And again, maybe this, as we're talking, like kind of thinking it through too, I think that circles back to the original thing you said, right? He was ownership's guy on the ground. Like, they didn't want to be involved in that way. They liked owning a team, but they weren't running day-to-day operations. Scott O'Neill was. And his ability. So he's their guy. They're listening to what he says. They're listening to what he said in terms of, morale here is this, or this is going on, or fans here are saying this. Again, also ownership. Michael Rubin does, but Josh Harris and David Blitzer, they don't live in Philly. They're not. Mm-hmm. They're not around fans every day. They're not walking in the street and stuff like that. That and the league connections too. Scott O'Neill is really connected to the league, and Adam Silver, and all that stuff. And I always go back to. I bring it up, I was proud of him in my book because it's one of my favorite anecdotes, that I got the StubHub guy to basically tell me that Scott O'Neill pitched him on a timeline that the team would be good to sponsor the jerseys on and he pitched him on a timeline that had, he said by whatever the year, 2017, 2018 will be good, don't worry. And Sam Hinkie, as you and your listeners will know better than anyone, was not here for timelines, right? And that to me was just telling.
We take a quick break from our conversation with Yaron, which is going amazingly, I'm sure, to talk about our presenting sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook. It is time for the finals. The odds are in for the finals. Suns are a minus 177 favorite. The Bucks at plus 150. The first game, Suns, I think, are a 6-point favorite. Yeah, yikes. So I guess a lot of that has to do with Giannis. I guess the Suns are one of those teams, like the Raptors when they won the title, that I think they're going to win. I would bet on them to win, but I'm not going to totally buy it until they don't win. But the Bucks plus 150, it doesn't seem like enough value to me. Just doesn't. Maybe I'll be a live better with this. DraftKings Sportsbook is where you live bet. It's where you futures bet. It's where you game bet. It is the only sportsbook you should be using because it is the best sportsbook right now. If you're a new user, you have a chance to turn $1 into $100 in site credits. No matter who you pick in basketball, if you bet $1 and they win, you get $100 in site credits. Also, great odds, great promotions. I've been talking to them about next Ricky season. I have an idea centered around Mike betting for the other team. So hopefully we'll have that next year. Safe, secure, reliable, and like I said, great app, and they support the Ricky. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code RTRS when you sign up to turn $1 into $100 in free credits. Bet on the basketball team of your choice to win their next game, and when you do, you get $100 in free credits. That's promo code RTRS for a limited time. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Wager paid out in site credits. Restrictions apply. In partnership with Meadows Racetrack and Casino. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Also, we have just renewed our relationship with DraftKings, and as part of that renewal, they will also be supporting the Providence Animal Center and Coded by Kids. I said, hey, how about you all do this? They said, sounds like a great idea. So thank you, DraftKings. You said he's good at PR. I have to question that, right?
I just what you're saying. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, because he's certainly good at getting coverage and getting attention. But part of being good at PR is knowing what to get coverage for and what to get attention to. And I don't think, look, when you have a professional sports team, getting people to do sales for you is not fucking hard. Getting people to work for you is not hard. Them, promoting themselves as a great workplace, I just don't think that they would have trouble. I don't know what the end is other than to make Scott look good. And that, so all of the PR that Scott O'Neill did was for Scott O'Neill. That was the end game. The end game was for Scott O'Neill. And I don't think that makes you good at PR. I would actually propose that makes you bad at PR, in that he he had the skills to get coverage, but he was getting coverage for all the wrong things, you know? And I think that was part of and if you were good at PR, maybe you shouldn't be like shit talking fans in Twitter DMs because they disagreed with you.
That is,
you know?
no, it's a funny point. You're right. I hear you're saying, I can't argue. It's a funny point. You're right. So I guess, I know you're right. He's good at, how about this? He's good at self-promoting, right? And he's good at getting himself covered. And they're good at pushing a lot of narratives. And I'm going to try to figure out, like, they've been very big on this diversity and, you know, and we have all these female women executives in the top, and they've had all these stories on that stuff. And I'll just say, you know, you talk to a lot of people who've come through that organization in recent years, and they'll say that, you know, some people say, yeah, it is the case. There are plenty of people who say it's not the case, and that they've pushed that stuff a lot. And it's the, you know, people, and I say the PR, like, you have, you know, they did, the Inquirer's done stories on people on, I forget, like how they had a woman executive at the top of every branch or something like that. And they're almost forcing them to give interviews sometimes. And there's just a lot of things aren't as pretty as they seem sometimes. And a lot of the sales force, even the sales team stuff, right? Like, and I'm not saying this is all Scott O'Neil, it's the organization, but even the sales team, where all the sales team loves him, all they do this. Yeah, a lot of them do, but a lot of them don't. And especially, you know, there's a whole thing with the Devils. After after they consolidated, after the Devils and Sixers kind of consolidated, and the Sixers had their new under HBSE, and Sixers had the new facility in Camden, and basically all these sales employees were given. I'm gonna try to get the details right here. I should be careful, but the tax break they got in Camden, right? Very dependent on having, it was 250, I think was the number, employees working in Camden. So one of the things they did is they told basically all the Devils employees, okay, you guys either go work in Camden now, or you're not going to have a job. So because the idea being you need the employees, and they would bus people up from Camden then at night to go like do work sales at Devils games and things like that.
No kidding. Wait a minute. So people that work for the Devils, which is, in case, and I'm overly familiar with the geography of New Jersey now, that's nowhere near Camden.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's basically
the Prudential Center. Right. Unbelievable.
So things like that. And these were people who are not making a lot of money. You know, again, we say the numbers. Anyone who makes that kind of money knows, especially in these areas, you know, $60,000 a year is not I mean, you're not poor, but that's not like you're loading, do whatever you want. Right.
Right.
So there are little things like that. And the other part I'll add is there were 2 lawsuits last year that came out. One was from a dancer, another was from a former, I think it was facilities manager, basically alleging discrimination and things like that. And, you know, bad workplace and stuff. So there's a lot to sort through there. It's hard to go through all the details, you know. I'm not saying it's all true, but just, again, going back to the PR thing I brought up, like the idea that if you Google Sixers and Scott O'Neil and all that stuff, and you'll see a million Sports Business Journal and Forbes, and that whole sports business cottage industry, and you'll see all these articles talking about how great everything is, and it's just not always the case. And clearly, you know, the StubHub deal was certainly forward looking, you know, in terms of dynamic pricing. I could certainly question a lot of the information that they're getting, like through doing that, and the fact that they're sort of double dipping by selling twice. And I think the lack of transparency as to what tickets the Sixers are selling and what they're sold out, what they're not. But I would say that deal was forward thinking, and he's clearly good at making money, which is his job. It's look
just
at the valuations, right? Like look what they buy, 280, and it's up to 2.1 billion, and you can make all the excuses, you know, but you got to give credit where credit's due. You got to give credit where credit's due.
I think most people are more familiar with a CEO who's like Chris Heck seems like a normal sales marketing business guy. Like you don't hear about Chris Heck scheduling press basketball games so he can beat everyone, right? But you do hear that about Scott. So it's just like, it's a different thing, you know?
No, you brought up, it's a funny point. Like could be good at PR and also bad at it in a way. It's like the duality that I think both is true. By the way, I'll go back because again, talking about, you know, inclusion and stuff, and I'll add you on the part because you brought up Chris Heck and I forgot this. And again, you look at one point at the heads of Sixers and Devils. I'm going to mess up the exact descriptions, but you have Scott O'Neil. Then you have the president of the Sixers, was Chris Heck, which is Scott O'Neil's longtime buddy. Jake Reynolds is Scott O'Neil's brother-in-law. He is, I forget, he was president. He might have been the president. I forget. He was one of the top guys. And Scott O'Neil's brother was one of the top guys in the Devils. So again, you're talking about if you want to talk about the old boys network, right? That kind of to me would summarize it in a way.
Yeah, for sure. But what do you think the perception of him is league-wide? Like, what do you think other organizations see when they see him?
I mean, so I can tell you for my book, I spoke to a couple on the record, even team presidents from other teams, people who from the Bucks and the Hornets. They liked him. People like him. I think people think he's smart and forward thinking, and like they look at again the jersey thing. That was really good. He was ahead of that. So I made fun about in terms of the timeline and pitching a timeline that Sam Hinkie wouldn't be on. Fine, but he also was the first got on this jersey sponsorship before anyone else, right? And for a team that maybe listeners will be upset at this, but for a team that was certainly not deserving of being the first to get a jersey sponsorship, right? In terms of where the Sixers were at that point. So people. They think there's a lot of people who think he's really smart with the business stuff. His desire or his interest in basketball ops was definitely it was not a secret, right, throughout the league. Like, and I spoke, there are lots of. I'm trying to think of examples. People just knew it, even like around the Knicks stuff that he was pushing. But again, I think with the Knicks, he was viewed as more as a good guy because he wasn't James Dolan. So that helps your reputation. But when he came in, a lot of people thought he was trying to be the GM and the president, like that he was angling for that job when he kind of came into Philly originally.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I went looking through old emails I sent to people that I knew at MSG when the Sixers first hired him. Mm-hmm. And after I had met him, my emails were, hey, I met him. He seems to be a really sharp guy and have his shit together. And honestly, I thought I had a pretty good relationship with him until they got rid of Sam and we put the billboard up. That seemed to be a splintering in the relationship.
I'm shocked.
But I think he does present. I want to be clear. I don't know him. Like, I don't know him personally. I know that I think he was too involved in basketball operations with the Sixers. I know that he was the reason that Sam isn't there. I don't know him, but he does present really well when you meet him. He's charming.
For sure.
When
you hear him on a panel and stuff, you're like, oh, this guy, even when he does, I don't buy into this self-help business, culture book thing. But like you hear it, it's like, oh, I see where this is. And I mean, I get it 100%. I agree with you 100%.
Do you think do you think his next job will be in the NBA?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have no idea. Obviously I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'll say he's gonna say no. He's gonna say like pushing. I'm trying to play it out right now, right? I feel like if he ends up back in the NBA, that's almost him not failing. That's too strong a word. But he's saying, I want to do something different, build something new, change the world, all that stuff. So the NBA would be against that, right? I could see a team throwing a lot of money. Like I could see a new owner or an owner in a small market trying to throw a lot of money at him and say, hey, come build us up here. So if I'm playing it out, but yeah.
When the book stuff started for Be Where Your Feet Are, which is the most public press tour I've ever seen for honestly, Doug Peterson, when he wrote his book about winning the Super Bowl, did not do a press tour like Scott O'Neal.
This is what I'm talking about, the PR. That's what I'm saying.
Well, so I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast when it started, because I texted somebody, I would just say somebody with knowledge of the situation. And I said, boy, this is a really public thing. And the response was, well, he's looking for a job. And like when you look at it under that guise, because I can't even imagine an organization saying, yeah, it's okay, Scott, during our playoff run, go ahead on every NBA podcast and talk about yourself. Right. I think at that point, everyone was pretty clear what was going on, and this was his final flourish to give himself a really positive, exit from the Sixers.
I do believe, my understanding is this was in the work for a few months. Again, you'll hear different, like who decided, who did this, who pushed on that. That's funny. It does it does come off differently if you look at it like that. Though, I mean, the part that I was surprised, I didn't know this, that he's also what the Inquirer reported, right? He's an investor, right? He has an ownership stake in the team too, right? Which I did not know. I figured he was taking on a big salary. I did not know that part.
Well, I didn't know what it was, right? So Adam Aaron also had a piece of the team, but it was a very small piece of the team from what I understand. And there were, like Will Smith had a negligible piece of the team. So I don't know what it was, but man, if he got in at the right time, he's certainly walking out, where his feet are with plenty of money. Well, I think before we get to Simmons, I think his legacy, the imprint that he leaves is, and I've mentioned this before, this will not be new, but he always had a dangerous amount of basketball knowledge in that he had too much basketball knowledge to sit in his position and not just fucking stay out of it, but not enough to really know what he was doing. And he, almost in the same way that a coach is too invested in winning that particular basketball game to also make front office decisions, Scott was too invested in the public perception and making money to do it. And it was like this, I almost think he'd be better in a sport where he did not have such a particular passion, because he actually is good at basketball, unfortunately. Like, he's a good basketball player from all reports, and he does love it. So I almost think it would be hard for me to work inside the Sixers in an executive position, not that they would hire me, and just not be at all interested in the decision-making process. And that is my perception of him, along with being too much of a self-promoter.
I've stolen the dangerous amount of basketball knowledge from you, because I think that's perfect. Because I agree with you. I think that is I think that's a perfect way to describe it. And he is. I've never thought about it. Right, if he had stayed with the Eagles, it might have been more interesting. He is a good basketball. I mean, we'll laugh, but you see the clips. Like, maybe he's missing 15 in a row before he puts them out. But you see a clip of him. It's hilarious that he puts out a clip of him hitting 20 jumpers in a row, but he's still, hitting 20 jumpers, which. I don't know. I'm not doing that at my age now.
We have some good stories about the press basketball games that I wish somebody would put their name to. That maybe I'll be able to convince that person to. I think I've heard a couple, and yes, I would hope. I feel like you have the ability to do that, so you should push that. Yeah, come on. Just tell us the stories about the basketball games. Well, and so So I wanted to transition, if you have a few minutes, just to talk about Simmons and your article about Simmons and the.
I'm good. It's Sunday morning, and my kids are downstairs. Can I stay here for 3 hours, please?
Yeah. Well, so the title of the headline of the article is not nearly as good as the article is. So the headline is Ben Simmons' playoff struggles create quandary for 76ers. Just the most innocuous title, but I thought it was, and I really think that the Ben Simmons problem actually leads back to Scott O'Neil, in that I think ultimately the biggest error for the Sixers in Ben Simmons is the fact that they have turned over who is running basketball operations basically 4 or 5 times in 6 years, has made it almost written that nobody would do anything about the Simmons issue because they don't have enough time to. And, looking back on it, Sam Hinkie, Jesus, God bless. I'm sorry for doing that. Sam Hinkie was a pull the goalie guy, if you understand the Malcolm Gladwell reference, and the make the move a little too early rather than making it a little too late. That's what he did with MCW. And I almost think if you come in as running basketball operations for a team and you see Ben Simmons, you're going to be like, well, let me see what I got here for a year, and then we'll decide what we're going to do. And every time that happened with somebody, they were gone, and then there was somebody else in there. And he never had to change or prove himself because there was always someone who was infatuated with the idea of what he was. And we saw it with Doc Rivers here, and that we saw it, when Brett was running the team and when Elton was running the team and Brian Colangelo, who drafted him. So to me, that is the biggest issue. It all comes back to ownership's lack of ability to commit to who is running basketball operations, and it just sort of let Ben Simmons be Ben Simmons for 5 years, and nobody did anything about it.
I agree with that, except I would put more blame on Ben himself too. I agree with what you're saying, right, that it's hard to, and you've seen that. I mean, Daryl, I guess Daryl, he tried trading Ben Simmons, right? So it's not exactly
almost immediately,
right?
Almost immediately, right?
But I do think that shows you, but it does also feel like he was, in general, this is a different conversation, but to prove your point, it feels like he sat back a little more this year in year one and assessed what was going on than he might have if he was there for 5 years, right? And kind of exactly what you're talking about, other executives. I do feel like Ben deserves more of the I'll say blame than just. It goes back to the original thing, like it's the stupid cliche, but if you don't, can you fix a problem if you don't admit there's a problem that exists, right? And he refuses to admit a problem exists, and it's baffling to us, and it's baffling to people, everyone who's come through that organization.
So I wanted to ask you about that, and to be clear, I put all of the blame about his lack of development as a player on him. That is 100% on Simmons. What I say the problem is from the organization is identifying that he feels that way and deciding to move on, right? And which they were on. I don't believe that there's a way, and Doc Rivers proved it, because all I heard about was accountability. And look, there's Sam Cassell, and he's a point guard, and like we're just in the same exact fucking spot. I think that goes back to Ben. I think the most of your article, there were 2 points that seemed the most glaring, and one points to the thing that you just talked about. And I'll say that second. The first one is Jim O'Brien just sort of getting up in front of there's a scene in the article where Jim O'Brien basically gets up in front of everybody, who was an assistant coach for the Sixers at the time, and basically said to everybody, you can remind me who was in the room, but basically said, how has this guy improved at all in the last 3 years? He hasn't. Tell me a way. And that is a pretty damning thing for an assistant coach to say about a star player.
Yeah, and the guy who's been around the league for a while. He might have been, I'll be giving an annoying correction. Was he an assistant then? He might have been in his transition to senior advisor's best friend to Brett Brown. I don't remember exactly. Right,
whatever it was.
But yeah, no, it was. And the thing is, like, it's true. That's the crazy, like, it's true. It's not even like the question. It's not the grumpy old coach saying like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, how's this guy improved? It's true. So yeah, maybe you can point, maybe he's a little better defender or whatever, but it's just, you look at it, it's like, not even that. And I forgot when I was looking back and writing that article, and like, you see the clips of him shooting at Summer League in the beginning of his rookie year. And it's like, he's pulling up from the elbow, and you think like, oh, we said he couldn't shoot then. Are you kidding me? If he shot like that now, there'd be a parade every day, right? If he pulled up from the elbow the way he did in that first season.
And the second one is your conversation with him. Yeah. And I thought you were incredibly annoyingly consistent in you continuing to press him, because it reminded me of 2 specific things. One, Andrew Sharp told a story once about Sixers Media Day, just sort of going back and forth with Simmons about whether he's a point guard or not.
Right, yes.
And Simmons got shitty with him when he suggested that he wasn't really. And then your discussion actually reminded me of when you were writing the book. You kept asking me questions about my father, and as if I wasn't shitty with you the last time that you asked me questions about my father. And you have a very good skill of sort of making pretend that the previous part of the conversation hadn't happened. So you have this conversation with him, and it's a conversation with you and Ben about, you're basically suggesting, well, it would make things easier if you just shot a corner 3, right? It would make it easier for Joel. It would make the offense work. And he basically runs through sort of like runs in circles logically to explain to you why it's not necessary for him to do it. And it made me want to ask you, do you think that's what he actually believes? Or do you think his fear of failing at it is pushing this false bravado of his and saying that he doesn't believe it would be true, because it seems impossible for him to actually believe that it wouldn't be true?
That's a good question. First of all, I'm really not an asshole. It's just when I put the hat on, like, I got to get my answers, then I'll do it. That's fine. And in general, separately, you're cracking me up.
No, for sure.
The answer is, I'll give you an annoying. I feel like it's probably both, right? It's probably both. I'll say, like, there are lots of people, I hope I put it in there because I'm going to say it. I mean, Monty Williams, I had told colleagues, I think that was in the article, right? That Monty Williams had told other people that he thought Ben was just scared of, didn't want to look bad. And I've always go back to, forget even looking bad, he must fucking hate when he looks good and hits a 3 and he gets treated like Rudy, like, when Joel Embiid's jumping up and down and everyone's going crazy, like he's some bench warmer who hit a shot who's lucky. He must hate that. That might be worse even than like missing for him, right? He must hate that. He's like, in his mind, and I'm a number one pick, a basketball star, all NBA. Like, why am I being treated like that? So I think that's part of it, but and then it's led to this feeling where we're better off without me shooting, which it doesn't make sense. And the funny part, going back to that conversation now, is like, to me, the corner three conversation is just gone. Like that was Brett Brown, and I spoke to him that time. That was after Brett Brown, who had clearly was at a loss of what to do, called Ben Simmons and tell his agent, tell his brother, I want to see 1-3 per game, which is probably not a great idea if you're trying to endear yourself. But that's clearly, to me, a sign of just a man who's saying, I don't know, I'm fucking lost. I don't know what else to do here. I'm like, I'd have no other options. And then Ben responded by not taking another 3 the rest of the season or whatever. It's just. To me now, like, the corner 3 conversation is gone. It's like, if I had the same conversation with him, it'd be, hey, when you get the ball, would you be willing to turn and face the basket, right? It would just we've taken a step back.
Well, the conversation about what position he plays is so complicated, because people talk about, well, just move him to power forward. Well, that's fine, but that means he actually has to shoot corner threes. It's almost like any position on the floor besides point guard is actually less valuable for him. Like, he actually has the most skills for point guard, but he lacks the one that is most necessary when the playoffs come around, which is the most confounding thing about his game, is that people say he's positionless. My assertion has been he's positionless because he doesn't have the requisite skills to play any position. When we talk about positionless, we talk about, well, you could play Kawhi at 2, 3, or 4, and you'll be fine, or you could play, Devin Booker at 2 or 3 or 1. It's players who can play numerous positions, not players who can't play any of them.
Right. It's like, oh my God, this is awesome. This guy can play so many positions. Not, oh shit, we have no positions to play this guy at, right? So that's the difference.
So do you think? So when people talk about his performance in the playoffs this year, they talk about it as if, or the people who want to support him, well, he obviously had a mental problem. If he had just been normal Ben, it would have been fine, so on and so forth. To me, what happened this playoffs, which is sort of like the snowball slowly coming downhill and ended up as this. And, finally a team that was an average or a sub-average defensive team could do this to him, now that everybody has found out, and it created this. He has been somebody who has surrounded himself with people who have reaffirmed his ability, to do whatever he wants, whether it's his brother being a shooting coach, his brother being his manager, like all of these different things. I got the sense that, and it's probably too late for the Sixers, but I got the sense that this particular thing was so embarrassing and so eye-opening that maybe this would be the straw that broke the camel's back, and maybe his belief would finally be, maybe I have to do something about this. If you had to guess, do you think that happened?
I thought so originally, and you can make the case for that, right? There are certain things, and like even when he says after Game 5, he was broken after Game 5, right? Like, is that what he said? It's definitely mental, whatever. Which it's not something you hear him. He doesn't show vulnerability, right? Ben Simmons,
right?
He just doesn't do that publicly at all. I'm a little the post-game press conference performance after Game 7, where he's turning to the Sixers staffer and asking for all the stats of all the good stuff he did. And I don't know if that's because Doc Rivers' quotes got to him, or he's on Twitter and saw Doc Rivers basically throw him under the bus, and Joel throw him under the bus and put his shields up, which, by the way, like, that'd be a very normal reaction if he's sitting in his locker and has someone text him those quotes or sees those quotes. Like, I'd put my shields up in that situation too, because understandably so, but that was Doc more than Joel, right? Doc Rivers did him a little dirty there. That was not like, and I get why, he was frustrated. It was the emotions getting to him, but that would just, you don't see that happen very often from a coach about a player after a 7-game series, right? But so he does that, and talking to some other people, I don't know if they get it. I really don't. I maybe I'm wrong, because this would be the time to, like you said, break it, and it would be the time. And he's capable of shooting. That's the crazy part, right? And again, we're not even talking about shooting anymore. Like, there are plenty of people who have clips of him drilling corner threes, and And again, it's not even about shooting. It's like he's capable of catching the ball at the foul line, turning and taking a hard dribble and finishing strong like that. That is capable of doing, right? He just stopped doing it. I don't know. I have a few conversations, maybe a little dubious in terms of like, does he get it? That you can do it's the same thing. All these things are wonderful. You are a great basketball player. Like that's why I made sure to put that in the article, because I think that's important to, I'll shout out, the Ben Dietrichs of the world who want to say how awesome he is, right? And like I'm not disagreeing with that. And I purposely always use the point, like he also, to say he doesn't generate points is wrong. He does generate offensive points, whether transition, defense, corner threes, whatever. But there's one thing, like you said, that he can't do, and it's become bigger, where it's not just shooting. It's be a participant in half-court offense. Like it's being an active participant in half-court offense. He is now at a point where he's not doing it, and he's refusing to, and he looks lost. And I don't know is my short answer. I don't know.
Well, too much of the conversation is about quote unquote, well, he's just not being used right. Like basketball is not that fucking complicated. He has the ball every time. Every time. Like there's, even when Devin Booker, for example, when he's on losing teams, you still watch and you're like, oh, I see him playing basketball. Like he touches the ball every possession. So if you are that level of a basketball player and you're touching the ball every possession, it maybe how you're used may limit the success of the team, but that is not what happened. Like nobody's saying to him, hey, whatever you do, don't dunk. Like nobody's saying that to him.
Don't get the ball, right? Like they're doubling Joel. Yeah. Don't get the ball at the foul line. Like it's.
And I think some of the reaction to, because I do feel sympathy for him in that it must be tough, but some of that is mitigated by the fact that anyone who doubted this, like he referred to as basically a moron, and looked down upon press who questioned him about it, and basically like looked at him like, well, you didn't play in the league, like you're not a point guard. It's like, well, dude, this isn't rocket science. It's basketball. I don't need to play in the league to see that. So
I mean, close to how many people make fun of your dad about this stuff, but I actually always thought his questions to Ben were really good and fair, right? He did like kind of the way I asked him the questions in the locker. Instead of going around, well, Ben, so maybe would you like to possibly be able to maybe shoot because that might help? He just asking him straight up, and people then tweet out, ha ha ha, Ben made fun of him, whatever stuff like that. And I agree with you, right? I agree with you.
Yeah.
He's so defensive about it.
So, last question: do you think he can be on the Sixers next year? Do you think the Sixers can open up their 21-22 season with Ben Simmons on the team? I've thought about this. I've been phrasing it like this. The way I see him on the roster, there's two ways I see him. One, the trade offers are so shitty that Darryl says it's just not, I can't do it because the value is so bad. I can't trade a guy at his lowest value, or that they completely, and it goes back to it, just redefine his position, understanding what our conversations were before, bring in like a Kyle Lowry type and just say, like, we are completely redefining everything and this is it. Those are the two ways I see it. But I'd be shocked if he was still on the team, right? No one's told me that, but I or anything. And not to do the Windhorse, whisper thing, but I'd be shocked if he was on the team. It just, you pointed out on a podcast, like, can you imagine his first free throw? Like the Sixers fans are done with him, right? It's going to be a mess. It's just the questions leading up to it. And I know Mike is somebody who will try to discount what that would be like in saying that it doesn't matter, but it matters. And it matters that during camp and during preseason and all that, like everything, you're talking about somebody who has had who crumbled with the weight of the world on his shoulders, and now you're just going to put another world on top of it, and then Joel has to answer the questions, and Doc has to answer the questions. I was going to say the other part with the Joel part is a big part of this too, because he made his feelings very clear post game as well, right? He made them very clear, and he is going to be involved in decisions the way any superstar is, right, going forward, and whether I don't think he's telling Daryl Morey you have to trade Ben Simmons, right? But I think they're aware of what he feels, and to bring it up, like, do you think Joel wants to answer questions about Ben Simmons come training camp, right? Oh yeah, of course not. Yeah.
So,
all right, Yaron Weitzman. The book, if you haven't read it, is great. And I was, we said when we had you on last year, I was expecting it not to be great, but it was actually great.
It's the best compliment you can get.
Yeah, it was tanking to the top, and the article about Simmons is really good. And Yaron is on Twitter at Yaron Weitzman. Anything else to plug before you go?
No, check Fox Sports. We actually have NBA coverage now, so go check it out. Not bad.
There you go.
I say so myself.
Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you, Yaron. Before we get to Mike and we talk about made-up Ben Simmons trades, let's talk about something that is insane right now, and that is the process of buying and selling a house. I know it because I'm in the process of buying and selling a house. We have the realtor for you. Adam Kasebe, the official realtor of the process, Ksebe. Now, Adam and his team and his Long and Foster team take care of all of Delaware, all of Maryland. But as I found out, if you need a realtor in New Jersey, which I needed one, I went to Adam Kasebe. If you need a realtor in PA, which I needed, I went to Adam Kasebe. Also, the other good thing is if you need a refinance, which I also did 6 months ago, and now I'm selling my house, so maybe it wasn't the best timing in the world, but still, you go to Kasebe. He is your one-stop shop for all realty needs. As well, I mentioned Delaware. I just spent a week in Lewis Beach with my wife. The Delaware beaches are where you want to buy. They're not overloaded and crazy like the Jersey Shore, and the taxes. Think of this. In addition to interest rates being low, the taxes in Delaware, you're talking about $1,000 a year, $1,500 a year compared to $15,000 a year in Jersey. And different towns for different people. I like Lewis. It's really quiet. It's 10 minutes from Rehoboth, which is beautiful. Also has the boardwalk. Then there's Dewey. If you're some 20-year-old lunatic that wants to party all the time, that's Dewey. Then Bethany is awfully quiet. Kasebe is your one-stop shop if you want to buy at the Delaware beaches, if you want to sell, whatever, Kasebe. Adam at processrealtor.com. Adam at processrealtor.com, or call him or text him 302-864-8643, 302-864-8643. We welcome to the pod a member of the pod, our very own Mike O'Connor, who writes for the Rights To Ricky Sanchez.com, got up early. Like everybody looks like Mike this morning. CJ looks like Mike this morning. Mike Levine, you look like it's 10 a.m. It looks like you're hurting a little bit even.
Dude, it's 10 a.m. on the 4th of July weekend. I've had a long weekend. My cousin's wedding was Friday. I was out last night. I'm going out again today. It's a hard life I live, man. It's a hard life.
It is. It is. Well, I appreciate you filling in the blank for the other Mike this time. You actually wrote people, I can tell just by people clicking through, people love made-up trades, and they also love to shit on made-up trades. That's my perception. So you did an article for the Ricky, 10 made-up Ben Simmons trades that you divided into 3 tiers. It was basically like, I would definitely do this, no question. I would do it, but I wouldn't feel too great about it, and I probably wouldn't do it. So the article is really good. I sort of wanted to lead off with 2 questions that are adjacent to this. First one being, and I give credit to Ethan on Twitter who brought this up. He mentioned a sign and trade for Lowry, and my point to him was, I don't think Lowry provides enough of what they need to make that trade. His point was, he thinks they can make 2 trades. One that is sort of selling low on Simmons in a Lowry sign and trade, and maybe you get 1 asset back. And then you use all of the picks and all of the young players they have for the star level trade. Do you think that that's a realistic expectation? Do you think that's possible?
I do think that's a possibility. I do think that's an option. Because that's something we've talked about, before the playoff implosion of everything this year, where, you just take kind of like Maxey, Thibault, Shake, and like every first round pick. And that's not far off from other star trades. Now, not like superstar trades, but like the Drew Holiday trade, right, for the Bucks. Like that level of guy, you basically just give a few good young players and like 3 or 4 first round picks. You can get a guy at that level, right? So I do think that that's out there. The reason I didn't put a Lowry thing in there is because I don't think that makes any sense for Toronto, right? Like, even if, like first off, Lowry being 36 is a huge deal, right? So if you're going to give Simmons, you have to get also probably like Gary Trent back or someone like that. And at that point, if you're Toronto, your whole roster is like Van Vliet and Simmons and Siakam. And it's like Simmons, Siakam, that kind of doesn't make sense. So I didn't really see that. But I do hear his point overall that there definitely could be a Simmons trade for one guy and then all the rest of your stuff for another guy.
Well, especially if and this was proven even back in the time where they were trying to trade for Harden, because essentially what it became is that Simmons's value does not seem to really offset enough of the other capital that you have to give up in the trade, right? Because what it came down to for the Sixers and the Nets for Harden was the Nets pushed in all of their chips, with all of those draft picks. And you really got the sense that the Sixers were going to have to do the same thing. And that's with Simmons even. So it just doesn't seem like, and I think part of it is how much he's getting paid. And there's a lot to do with it, but it just doesn't seem like Simmons is worth enough in those trades to make a real difference, because you're going to have to give up everything.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, those like super duper star trades, it's like they're not necessarily trading for Simmons. Like they're not just like looking to acquire Ben Simmons. It's more so that they're looking to just recoup maximum value for the guy they're shipping out. Whereas if we're talking about, maybe it's not Toronto, but like Minnesota has been a team that there was a rumor that they are infatuated with Ben Simmons. They are someone who like, okay, we want Ben Simmons. We'll give up whatever it takes for Ben Simmons, right? The difference between that and a team like Portland or whoever is they're not in the Ben Simmons market. They're just trading away a superstar and saying, I want the most I can possibly get. So, yeah, maybe you're right that you're better off, actually trading Ben to a team that wants Ben as opposed to just including him in the rest of like a platter for some superstar.
Right. And then the other advantage I would say that the Sixers have, I think it's an advantage, and we'll never really know, is that the teams that could outbid the Sixers in terms of draft capital just don't seem to be teams that, if we're talking about stars, I don't think Bradley Beal is rubber stamping a trade to Oklahoma City or New Orleans. I actually don't get the sense players want to play in New Orleans by and large, even though it's a cool city. I don't think Damian Lillard is doing the same thing to Oklahoma City or New Orleans. Like all these teams that have a ton of draft capital, I just don't think are in a position to trade for a star and have that star be happy. And I think that puts the Sixers hopefully in an advantage.
Yeah, when we talk about like the OKC or New Orleans, it's almost like you're competing with Brooklyn in a trade, but they're not the city of Brooklyn, right? Like the best that New Orleans could do for Damian Lillard is like Brandon Ingram and like 1,000 picks, which is basically Karis LeVert and 1,000 picks. I know LeVert's health has been worse, but it's kind of like that same package, right? And you're just kind of comparing, okay, is Ben, like how much more do you value Ben than those types of guys, if at all? But yeah, that is the difference between those two types of environments. And like you said, I think Dame would be a lot more willing to play with Embiid than with Zion or with whoever else is left on OKC. Yeah,
and especially not because of who Zion is as a player, but like these guys know that you don't win championships playing with 22-year-olds. Mm-hmm. They just know. They know that you win a championship playing with another player in their prime. By and large, that's the case, and I think that's where they would want to go. Before we get to the actual trades, because I had questions about actual trades, two other things. First, there was a report from Jason Dumas, who does have somebody within the Sixers, and most of his reports at least seem reliably sourced, regardless of how accurate they actually are. We'll never know. But he reported that the Sixers turned down Brogdon and a 1 for Simmons. Now, I think that's sort of market setting, whether they actually did it or not. I think that's the Sixers sort of saying, this is not enough. You have to come with enough. But that is sort of like the Lowry type trade where you get yourself a point guard, you also get a first round pick, and you hopefully take that pick and put it with other stuff. Is that a deal? Where would that deal have landed in your tiers?
Honestly, like at the very bottom. I think I'd rather do the Rozier and Gordon Hayward deal that I specifically told people not to yell at me about, and I still got yelled at for.
Right.
And Brogdon is always hurt, and his medical has just been an issue for forever. At least if you're getting like Terry Rozier, Rozier is kind of on the up and up, and he scored like an efficient 20 a game last year, and Hayward had a nice bounce back year. I'd rather do that than Brogdon and a first round pick.
And then the final question before we get to the trades is, how important is it to replace what Ben Simmons does defensively? And then how difficult is it to get a reasonable facsimile of what he does defensively? Maybe not as good, but to replace what he does good enough. So how important is it? And then how hard do you think it is to replace it?
Yeah, I wish I had a stronger take on this. This playoffs kind of like broke my brain as it pertains to perimeter defense, because I've always been kind of like a supporter of like saying one-on-one individual defense is undervalued. Like that's been a take of mine for a long time. And it's like, how do you watch the Sixers, who have arguably the two best perimeter defenders in the league, lose to a team that plays Trae Young and Lou Williams, and still say that like perimeter defense is this be-all, end-all? And like, keep in mind, Atlanta's missing their best perimeter defender, DeAndre Hunter, right? Like, I'm kind of like losing steam on that take. I don't know how much further I can take it. Now, the negative end of that, the negative example of that is like Portland, who just couldn't guard anything. And I mean, their defense was just historically bad, and you don't want to be them. But I don't see it as all that important to replace Simmons' defense. Like, yes, they will take a step back. They'll be maybe 4th in the league, 5th in the league in defense. But anytime your defense has like Matisse Thybulle and hopefully Danny Green and Joel Embiid and whoever else they sign, they're going to be a very good defensive team. So I don't see that as being of the utmost importance. And sorry, what was the second part?
Well, no, I think you answered it both. I think it was how hard is it to how important is it to replace, and how hard is it to replace, and the answer is sort of combined in your answer. I would just like to give myself credit in that I've been saying that guard defense doesn't matter for the entire 8 years of the podcast, because teams have won with bad guards on defense, but you don't win with a bad center on defense. Like, that's just, it's a fact. It's exactly what's going to happen. It's exactly what always happens. And I would rather have a great offensive guard than a great defensive guard. And it just, whatever. Let's get to the trades. We take a break from this conversation with Mike O'Connor to talk about somebody more important than me, more important than Mike. That is LL Pavorsky Jewelers, the original sponsor of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast. All right. It is the most important time of the year for LL Pavorsky. There's summer vacation, so you cannot call LL right now. You cannot. He's on summer vacation. I think he's in Hawaii with his wife. It's awesome. But then when he gets back on July 13th, you will be just 5 days away from the annual Summer Cabana Sale. That's right. July 18th through August 15th, it is the Summer Cabana Sale. You can go to llpavorsky.com to see all of the things that are for sale. There are new things added every day. And here is the best part. You get to see Cartoon LL on his Twitter, at the store, on the website. I love Cartoon LL. He was the first sponsor of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast, has sold, I think, 216 Rights to Ricky Sanchez listeners engagement rings. He's the only guy you go to for jewelry, the only guy you can trust, and the only guy that once a year has a cartoon version of himself in a Hawaiian shirt for the Cabana Sale. He's the guy. If you want to buy something from him, make an appointment, 215-627-2252. Email him, lee@llpavorsky.com. Just signed a new lease at 707 Walnut, so we got even more years. We're 32 years in. We got even more years coming with LL Pavorsky, or you can tweet at him at LL Pavorsky, and a generous sponsor of our charities, Providence Animal Center and Coded by Kids. Oh, I got to do the LL thing myself. LL Pavorsky Jewelers, Mike's not here, Lee's not here, I'm the only one left. It was always meant to end this way. Back to the Ricky. I don't want to ask you about all of them. I have specific questions about all of them. The first one is the Damian Lillard trade, which essentially gives up Simmons, Thybulle, Maxey, 2021 first, 2023 first, 2027 first, and then you get back Damian Lillard and Nas Little. My question for you specifically would be, how hard do you think it is to fill around those two players without Thybulle, without Maxey, without those picks? Like, how hard is it to remake a team that can win a championship if you're trading all of that for Lillard?
Probably not as hard as you think, because they will have stuff left, right? Like, if let's assume they're able to re-sign Danny Green, which I feel like they pretty much have to at that point. then you're looking at a roster of Lillard, Seth Curry, Danny Green, Tobias, George Hill is still on the roster, I guess, and then you are sort of left with like Isaiah Joe and B-Ball Paul. So you would have to fill it out with like, mid-level exception guys, that sort of thing. But with someone like George Hill, you still have the option of, using his salary to get somebody, right? Like, I don't necessarily think that this is the guy, but like this type of guy, if they were to trade for like an Eric Gordon, like some team that has a solid role player who is on too big of a contract and the team is trying to lose and George Hill's on an expiring and you're just like, we'll give you George Hill in a couple seconds or something for this guy. I think that's the type of dude that they would use to fill out the roster. Is that ideal? No. But, I don't think it's like a catastrophe. I think that when you look at teams that have done these types of deals in the past, they've been able to find guys, right? Like, I guess the first example that came to mind was like, that first year in Miami, they did struggle to fill out the rest of the roster. They found guys later on, like with Ray Allen and Mike Miller and whoever else. Granted, this is a 2-star team as opposed to a 3-star team, but I'm not as concerned as maybe some other people are. I think Darryl will find ways if they can do that.
I also wonder sometimes about whether the Sixers bench players are not good or whether if the stars were better, the bench players would look better. It just, every time you see a championship team, you look at these role players that end up having a great game, but you also look at them disappear for an entire series and the team still goes through. And I think Van Vliet is this great example of that Raptors team. Van Vliet made 1 3 in the Sixers series and the Raptors beat them. Van Vliet made 1 3 the entire series. And then, of course, he played great the next series. But if your stars are good enough, I think it can withstand the hot and cold streaks from role players, And I think that's been one of the Sixers' problems is that they don't have another player that can help the team sustain offensively aside from Embiid when Embiid's off the floor.
Yeah, and let's not forget that, at this point, I think we can say with a lot of certainty that the Sixers are going to be good when Joel Embiid is on the floor, no matter who's with him, right? Like, that first year, it was like him and TJ and Ersan and Covington and Nick Stauskas were like an unbeatable 5-man unit, right? Embiid can take some ridiculously bad groups and elevate them. And, maybe the mistake is assuming that you can just, acquire someone else that can do that as well. I mean, I think Lillard can do something close to that. But just having someone that can keep them afloat, that's the formula for winning a game, right? Like, if you just have Embiid carrying for most of the game, and then when Embiid goes out, can Lillard carry a 5-man unit? Yeah, I think he can.
So I'm going to jump to trade 4, and then we're going to go back to 2 and 3 because 4 was your CJ McCollum trade, which was in the next tier. It was in still do it, but not feel as great. So it's Simmons, Milton, 2021 second for McCollum and Covington. I would love to get Rob back for a number of ways. A lot of people have pointed out that he hasn't lit the world on fire. I still think he's Robert Covington. I don't think there's any difference about the way he plays. The thing I wanted to ask you about is you seem to have a higher perception of McCollum than a lot of people locally. I hear him compared to D'Angelo Russell a lot because Minnesota wanted them. Now, I think D'Angelo Russell's horrible, actually, and I don't think McCollum's horrible. But what do you think of McCollum as a player and maybe a player who has increased offense responsibilities on a team like this?
I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm higher on McCollum than I think Sixers fans seem to be. I'm not sure why, the consensus is so down on him. But look, man, McCollum takes 9 threes a game. He will fire around screens, pull-ups. He's so much more skilled than a D'Angelo Russell, and he plays with more zip, right? He's harder to guard one-on-one than D'Angelo Russell, and that ties into something that, look, there are other trades that we'll get to where I talk about SGA or De'Aaron Fox, and I love those guys. I think they're awesome. I think I would probably give up more to get them because they're younger. But at the same time, those types of guys, I do think that we would watch the Sixers run into not the same problem, but a kind of similar problem where there's still not a guy who you just give the ball to and say, get us a bucket late in the game. Like De'Aaron Fox because of his jump shot, and SGA because he's not like this super athlete. You know, we saw him struggle a little bit in that Houston series last year. Like, again, I think those guys are awesome, but they're not at the level of, in my opinion, they're not at the level of McCollum, who just like go 1-4 flat, get a shot, right? I think that there's a chance that if you trade Simmons for SGA and it's like the second or third round of the playoffs next year, and it's like, okay, why isn't SGA like carrying the load of the offense? And we kind of like relitigate this Simmons trade, like, well, why did we do this? We didn't get this guy who can do the one thing that we were missing, right? Like, I'm not saying that like those guys should have less value than CJ McCollum, but I'm saying like for this roster where you specifically need this guy who you can just give the ball to and get a shot late in the game, CJ is better at that. CJ is extremely durable. He's a good passer. He's a good guy. I mean, everyone has this idea that he's like shrunk in the playoffs. He hasn't averaged less than 20 points a game in a playoff series in 5 years. I don't know where that's coming from. I'm much higher on CJ, I think, than consensus seems to be. He's an incredible scorer, just a much more gifted one-on-one player than, you know, the rest of the guys in that tier 2.
I think what most of these trades come down to is, are they getting a guy who can be that player? Mm-hmm. That's basically, that's what it is to me. I have a similar perception of it. And I think that's why, so trades 2 and 3, and that's why I don't want to go too in depth into the pieces of any trade, because I think the real question is the main player you're getting a good enough player to do that, right? And that is the interesting thing about trades 2 and 3, because they're for Bradley Beal and Zach Levine. And their stock seems to rise and fall based on the day. And the confusing thing about both of them, now Beal has been good on good teams and good in the playoffs on good teams. So he has that as part of his history. But the last few years have just been him scoring 30 points a game on this dog shit team. Levine has gotten better, obviously, a better passer, better creator, still an incredible scorer, incredible shooter, but has always been on bad teams. So I guess my question is, how confident are you in each of those guys? We know they can get buckets, but how confident are you in Bradley Beal and Zach Levine being your primary perimeter player on a championship level team?
I'm extremely confident. I mean,
in both guys.
Less so Levine. Like, Beal has to be ahead of him by a significant margin, but like, I view Levine as being maybe not quite in the same realm, but like very close to being Devin Booker. Like that is someone who I would say is like probably his closest comparison in the league. And there is this perception out there that it is possible to be an empty stats guy when you average 27 a game on 63% true shooting. It's legitimately not possible. And like, the efficiency just doesn't check out, okay? It's not possible to be an empty stats guy on that efficiency and that volume. Look, it definitely says something about Levine that he can't like single-handedly elevate a franchise in the way that other guys can, right? But him as a scorer, as like the second best guy on the team with Embiid, where he's the guy who can, you know, close out games and go off for 40 on a night where they're dead and they need somebody to do that. He can absolutely do that. I'm not saying that Levine is like a top 10 player or anything like that. I'm just saying that the scoring is not at all fake. It is very, very legit. And, you know, there were also some people who said not the same thing, but similar things about Beal. Like, you know, they wouldn't give up all that I listed out for Beal. I mean, the guy was second in the league in scoring, right? Or did he lead the league in scoring? Bradley Beal is unbelievable. Like you said, he's kind of a good example of maybe what Levine is capable of on a better team, where, like you said, Beal has been a very good player on a playoff team. He's been deep into the second round. Like, we've seen him against really good defenses in the playoffs, and he's still that guy. And I think that's a good example of what Levine could be in a better situation.
The Levine-Booker comparison is interesting because numbers-wise and situation-wise, I think it all sort of adds up. Watching them, it is really interesting in that Levine's actually a way better shooter than Booker is, at least as a three-point shooter. I mean, Levine is one of the purest three-point shooters in the league. Booker's interesting because he's definitely... He always did this, but I think CP3 has made him do it more just in terms of finding spots in mid-range. And I think Booker probably has a better feel for the game than Levine does. But Levine is a pretty outrageous scorer when he's on. Like, pretty outrageous. Like, one of the best in the league.
Yeah, for
by
sure.
far.
I mean, Booker, like you're saying, Booker can play a little bit more in that mid-range. And he can, like, he has a little bit more of, like, an inside-out game where he has, like, a turnaround and he has a lot of face-up moves and stuff. Levine is just all ball screens, and what he'll do is just like I forget how many threes he takes a game, but like he'll just come around screens and it's like he almost plays like he thinks he's Damian Lillard, and that's a really effective way to play out. Like, I mean, he's a nuclear athlete. If you come up too high on that ball screen, he's going to get around whoever it is and finish in the lane. Like, the other thing about Levine is he is notoriously ridiculously hard worker. And it's a dude who, I know it sounds weird to say this for a dude who was drafted 7 years ago, but I still think he could get better. He's gotten better every single year he's been in the league. Like I said, ridiculous worker. He's going to be on the Olympic team this year, being around a lot of other great players. I think that could help him. I'm high on Levine. I'm a fan of his. So yeah, that's right.
I just can't imagine any world in which the Bulls do it. That's
really?
Actually, that's my problem. I just like, why would the Bulls do that?
So,
that's you know.
I can make the case.
Okay.
So Levine's on an expiring. This is the last year of his contract. It's possible that they look at that extension and say, we've had Zach Levine on a franchise for a while. We just kind of need a change. They just acquired a stretch five in Vucevic. That is exactly what Simmons needs. Simmons is, again, locked up for whatever it is, 4 more years. Maybe they think that Kobe White can really be a player, and they're like, hey, Simmons with this guy makes some sense. Also with Vucevic, our defense, will be worlds better with Simmons than it is with Levine. I do think that there's a possibility they could look at it and say, like, in that offer, I include 2 first-round picks and Shake Milton as well, and they might look at that and just be like, all right, well, this guy on an expiring who we're not even sure if we want, compared to this guy who fits, and we get a nice young player and 2 first-round picks, we'll take that.
All right. So just a great devil's advocate. So just to be clear, they don't want to pay Zach Levine $30 million a year, but they're okay paying a guy who just scored 5 points a game in the playoffs $30 million a year. And they just traded first-round picks for Vucevic, who we're calling a stretch 5, but... okay, I guess, but he's a pretty plodding. I mean, maybe you could compare him to Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez is a really good defensive player, and Vucevic isn't. I just can't see any. This is the problem to me. This is why you have to do 2 trades, because if you're a Bulls fan or you're a Blazers fan, you're going to tell me that the thing that we just got back for our 30-point scorer is this fucking guy who won't even dunk. No offense. Just saying it as a fan, I can't imagine those franchises making that decision.
So
I
like,
can't.
You're not wrong at all. Like, you're absolutely right. That's the problem with me making this list. I can totally see both sides of it. But like, at the same time, you could also just look at it and be like, yes, Ben Simmons shrinks in the playoffs. We haven't been to the playoffs in whatever it is, 5-6 years. Like, why don't we just get a guy who we know can get us there? We have other guys who can create shots. If you look at Ben Simmons' list of accolades in the NBA, it's much longer than Zach Levine's. Like, that's maybe what they could talk themselves into. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm playing devil's advocate here. But, like, I don't know, man. That's what I really struggled with on this list is, like, there's not a single trade on there, even the worst ones, even the Charlotte one for Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier. There's not a single one on that list where you look at it and say they wouldn't have been better off against the Hawks with those guys, right? Every single one would have made them better off against the Hawks. And it's just so hard, man, because there is very obviously, this dynamic where Ben has an enormous impact on winning in the regular season, specifically in the first 42 minutes of a game. But in the last 6 minutes of a regular season game, or in like pretty much any of a postseason game, past the first round, it's like it's a disaster. And I don't know how to square those two things. I don't know how other teams will square those two things. But I do think it's possible that teams like Portland, teams like Chicago will look at it and just be like, I just want a guy to get us there in the regular season, and we'll figure it out some other way.
Am I crazy in thinking, so people really liked the SGA and De'Aaron Fox trades, and am I crazy in thinking that the Sixers would be a better team? Now, the real problem here is Hayward's health. I think the Sixers would be a better team if they made the Charlotte trade that got them Rozier and Hayward than if they traded them for SGA or De'Aaron Fox. Am I crazy in thinking that?
I mean, they might be a better team next year, but I think you're not setting yourself up at all in the long term because Rozier is on an expiring, and who knows what Hayward is going to be like year to year, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's incorrect at all. But I mean, SGA and Fox, I would definitely rather have one of those guys than those two in the long run.
And the last one I wanted to talk about, because we talked about SGA, and I wanted to talk about SGA and De'Aaron Fox, but we talked about them earlier, was the Cavs trade, where basically they're getting, what was it, Sexton, Love, and was there something else maybe?
Yeah,
I forget.
Protected first rounder.
There you go. I actually don't mind the idea of buying low on Love as salary filler, because I think he has shown that he's perfectly willing to stand in the corner and shoot open threes. And I think he can play with the Harris thing is tough, but I think he can play with Embiid. Sexton, I'm not buying. I like Garland so much more than Sexton. There's something about Sexton that the numbers look one way, but when I watch him, they look another way. I don't even buy his shooting numbers, which he shoots enough for it to seem to be true. But when I look at him, I'm not buying it.
Yeah. So on the Love thing, I think you're right. I think he's got something left in the tank. He's clearly unhappy there. He shoots the ball when he's open. What a concept. I mean, just a guy who just doesn't think and just shoots threes. Colin Sexton, man, I don't know. I want to be in on him. I like the ethos of a player like that who just has a little like edge and has like every night is just like F you, like I'm taking over this game. But I kind of agree that he probably shot over his head this year. He's not actually going to be a high 30s three-point shooter. And there is, I mentioned in the article, but there's just something a little Russell Westbrook-y about him where it's like, it's cool that you want to dominate this game and I like your energy, but like maybe make the wide open the pass to the guy who's wide open in the corner rather than shoot this crazy off-balance floater. Like maybe that makes some sense there. So yeah, I feel like that's a trade where if like Kevin Love doesn't totally rebound and Colin Sexton like pisses off Joel Embiid's traded in like a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what's interesting is there's a lot of stuff about the Embiid Supermax, and I've read some hand-wringing over, do you offer it to him? Like, I don't think they have a choice in offering it to him, really. I think the real choice, but I don't know why Bobby Marks in general, and I don't know why so many people overcredit the complication of the Embiid like injury clauses in his contract. The injury clauses are only valuable if you're willing to cut Joel Embiid. That's it. And I just don't even see, even if he broke his foot the first year of a Supermax deal, I don't think they would cut him. I still don't think they would cut him. So I don't think it's that complicated. The real interesting thing will be, will he sign it? And, you know, what the Sixers have to prove to him to get him to sign it, you know?
I think he's probably going to sign it because it's a lot of money for a guy who's had all those injuries, and he likes it here. And if he ever wanted out, he could just demand a trade. So I would see him signing it. As for, you know, there's zero chance that the Sixers should or will like just balk at that and say, no, we're good, thanks. There's no chance.
Right.
If you like. Okay, if you trade Simmons and then don't sign Embiid, like what even is your franchise? Like, you have no direction, no plan, like nothing. I don't see that happening at all. Embiid has earned it, by the way. Like, it would suck if this turned into like the Ryan Howard contract, but I mean, like, he's earned it. He's earned it, and he's the best player the franchise has had in over a decade, and there's no length they shouldn't go to keep him.
So the Suns will meet the Bucks in the finals. The Bucks, who you have, both of us, in fairness, have repeatedly said are frauds. I have gone back and forth on how fraudulent I think that they are, and I don't even think these playoffs have proved that they're not fraudulent, honestly.
I agree.
I mean, you would agree with that, right?
I've been asking people out. I've been asking around. I've been like, if the Bucks win the championship, will you view them in a meaningfully different way? And the answer has been overwhelmingly no. Like, if you're Brooklyn, you should still come into next year thinking we are going to slaughter these guys. It's
been a very strange playoffs in that way, and I'm not in favor of asterisk for this season. I am for the previous season. I think this season has been normal enough on some level to, and you have two teams who are both good in the regular season in the finals. Like, one team who's had the best record in the conference twice already. It's legitimate enough for me. So I know it's hard to make a pick with Giannis being the way he is. I think the way that you have to look at Giannis is that he will play. He just won't be 100%. With that as the stage for it, what is your finals pick?
I'm taking Suns relatively comfortably with or without Giannis. That's my pick. Okay. I just, at the end of the day, I trust a half-court offense centered around CP3 and Devin Booker over Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton. In a weird way, I don't think that the Bucks have really faced a team like this. I mean, the only time that we saw them have to play two actual stars was the first two Brooklyn games where they got embarrassed.
And they lost them both.
Yeah. And like, the other thing, they were able to get by in this Hawks series, without Giannis, and they were okay in the half court, and Middleton stepped up, and Holiday stepped up, and Brook Lopez too, against a much better defensive team in Phoenix. I don't know that they have the same luck. At the end of the day, man, I just don't believe in Milwaukee. I just don't believe in them. So I'm going Phoenix.
My final statement on this, I listened to Zach Lowe and Kevin Arnovitz talk about CP3, and I love them both former Ricky guests, love Zach, love Kevin Arnovitz. I don't love the resistance to saying that this rightly changes CP3's legacy. Like, everybody seems to want, the smart basketball people seem to want to go overboard and say, they talk about, well, he was actually good in the playoffs before, and he did, and it was actually bad injury luck, and it was actually this, and all of this stuff about him being a bad leader actually isn't true. I don't think that's true. The point of, the reason that Sixers fans are sad right now is because the Sixers lost. Winning and losing is the point. And I know sometimes chance is what happens with winning and losing, but sometimes winning and losing matters. And it's not that the best players of all time happen to have won a championship. It's not the championship that makes them the best players. They won the championship because they are the best players. And I think it is a testament to Chris Paul's insistence on coming back over and over and over again that proves that he should have been here. But also, if he hadn't have gotten here, I do think his legacy should be worse. I think the players that win championships should have better legacies, especially best players. And I don't think it's impossible to think that Chris Paul learned lessons of his past in being a dickhead to teammates, and maybe he's not such a dickhead anymore. What happens with the reason that an athlete prime exists is because, and the reason it happens when it does, it is because it is the combination of being mature mentally, but also still having your physical powers. And if players could still have their physical powers when they're 40, I am convinced they would be much better players than when they were 30, because they would have better temperaments, they would have learned more lessons, they would have more knowledge. Chris Paul at 36, still being able to play and having all that knowledge, I just feel like he's learned things, that he hasn't before. And did he have some bad luck? For sure. But I do think that your legacy should change having won a championship. I think Dirk's legacy rightly changed when he won a championship. And I don't think that this is a condemnation of anything that anyone said about CP3 before this. I think it might be proof of what people said about CP3 before this, and that he didn't melt down. Zach brought up stats, like that CP3's crunch time stats are actually good. But the other person that he brought up whose crunch time stats are slightly better are DeMar DeRozan. Well, that's the proof that those stats aren't always true. I actually think I think LeBron crunch time stats are proof that the stats aren't always true. I don't think he's great in crunch time. He's not like a great creator on the perimeter. I think his shots are challenged in crunch time because he doesn't have like a ton of moves. He's not like I think his game actually works better in the first 45 minutes of the game. So that is my long statement, is to say I think this is meaningful for Chris Paul, not in a coincidence sort of way, but I think it's meaningful in that getting to the championship is the point of sports, and his legacy should change if he gets to the championship. So that's
to understand your point correctly, what you're saying is this: if they win the championship, this is not a sign that Chris Paul was always a championship player. It's a sign that he has changed or improved in some way. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think it's two things. I agree with the first point. I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that he was a championship player when he was 28 or 29. I think it might mean that he's a championship player now, and what he adds now mentally and maybe his physical limitations make him do those things more. But I also think that that sometimes continuing on and keep doing it enough times to where you get in this position also makes you great. And if he had retired after the OKC year and never done this, then he shouldn't be looked at as great. I think him continuing to keep at it and do it again and again and again and again, I think that also adds to his legacy. So I don't think it's entirely that he's different now, but I also think it's ignorant to think that he's not different now. He's 36. Of course he's different now. Maybe playing in Oklahoma City made him a different player too. Maybe turning everybody off in Houston made him a different player. Maybe his Clippers experience made him a different player. He certainly isn't a guy that players have liked playing with year after year after year after year, but the Suns this year seem to enjoy playing with him, and the Thunder last year seemed to enjoy playing with him. So maybe something changed.
Well, okay. I don't disagree entirely. The only thing I would say is that as far as him changing or his leadership style changing, I think what really happened is that he's found a bunch of young guys who are willing to listen to him and find him interesting, as opposed to trying to preach to David West or Matt Barnes, and they're like, dude, shut the fuck up. I don't need you to I don't need you to point to me on every play to tell me where to go. Whereas DeAndre Ayton is actually very willing to listen, and that makes a difference too. I think in general, it is right that Chris Paul, I'm assuming they win. Maybe I shouldn't, but I think it would be right that he retires with one championship. I think he will have deserved that. I think the karmic forces of the universe will have made the right decision there, in the sense that I agree he's had a lot of really damning shortcomings. He's also had a lot of bad luck. And for him, he did everything right this year. He found the perfect situation for him. And for the stars to kind of align for him, I think is exactly right. I think him retiring with one championship is exactly what he deserves.
Only thing to respond to that in him finding young players, absolutely, totally possible and true. But as a person who at 45 was a manager and was at 35 was a manager and with 30 was a manager, I know how to talk to people a lot better now than I did 10 years ago. I just do. Nobody responds well to being pointed at in public and told where to go. Nobody. Like, nobody likes that. Not nobody. Very few people like that. Even young players don't like that, which is why the whole, bring this dude in to be a mentor bullshit never works while that dude can still play. Because NBA players, whether they're young or not young, DeAndre Ayton might be a exception. Devin Booker's been in the league 7 years. He scores, 25 or 30 points a game. He's making $30 million a year. I don't think there's a ton of people that want to be pointed at and yelled at in public. And I do think it's possible that maybe he's learned to talk to people differently, and that maybe watching the way that people responded before in a negative way has taught that he's capable of learning and changing. Everybody is. And that's why people are different. That's why people are better managers older in their age than they are younger, because I think you learn that you have to talk to everybody differently based on what the way that they operate and the way that they respond. And that's what being a leader is. Being a leader is learning that you need to deal with everybody differently. I just think it's possible he's learned that,
To read a long feature on it, see how CP3 changed or how he changed, adapted his leadership style. Would love to know the ins and outs, but I'm not sure.
We'll see. Well, read MOC's trade piece on rightstoRickySanchez.com and don't tweet mean stuff at him. Just please.
Or do. It's all good, man.
Yeah, or do. I guess he doesn't really give a shit. All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks.
If you don't fuck with me, then I won't fuck with you.
If you don't fuck with me,
then I won't fuck with you.
but if you fuck with me,
I'm gonna fucking kill you!
Time for plan B.